Return of the Exiled, or Why Must I Be the Hero? By T.J. Stegaheis. Read by Yob. Dedicated to Kurt Reimert, whose stories inspired this work. Requiescat in pace. Chapter 14. To Gain and to Lose. Sard had them camp out of sight behind a hill well off the road. Then the men set out to collect firewood. "I can't believe that we have the book," said Tennant excitedly. "This is the whole reason for my mission." He hung a small lantern from a tree branch. "May I read it with you?" asked Wendy politely, wanting a distraction. "Of course," replied Tennant, and they sat on a log side by side as he opened the green book. The language was old and difficult to read, but they managed. They sat and read for a while, then they both looked up at each other in surprise. "But this is the opposite of what they teach in history," said Tennant. "The lizard men, or saurians, are the natives of this land, and we have treated them like monsters." "This makes them seem like the most civilized people of us all," joined in Wendy. "But we cannot just give the land back to them. Where would we go?" "I do not believe that question is something we will have a say in," replied Tennant. "It will be many years before they resolve that one." "I see," said Wendy. "You mentioned that the masters knew of this book from rumors. Who would have seen it in that foul tower?" "The Baron's soldiers," said Tennant. "Soldiers who drink talk." "Oh," said Wendy, "I see. Anyone with an interest in books would have likely overheard and remembered it being mentioned." "There is so much here on magic and natural processes," said Tennant. "I must read more." "No," commanded a strange voice. "You are finished now." They both looked up at a strange man in fancy leather armor who was standing at the edge of the clearing, holding Smoke by a rope around his neck, while 4 large soldiers held Sard and Bud, now bound and gagged. A tall, thin figure in a black hooded robe stood silently off to one side. Wendy made to jump up and draw her sword as Tennant began an incantation, but with a wave of his hand the hooded figure brought black oblivion on both. When Wendy next awoke, the lantern had gone out. The stranger who had spoken so commandingly to them was seated comfortably on a camp chair near the fire, drinking mead from a metal cup and looking over the green book. He was a handsome man in many ways, although with a cruel look in his eyes. He momentarily put down the book and leaned over to throw some wood on the fire. Sard and most of the men could be seen sitting tied to nearby trees. Riff was noticeably missing, and this gave Wendy hope. Smoke was suffering the worst. He was tied to a pole resting on 2 forked sticks just beyond the stranger, like a bush hen ready for roasting. He was bound from head to foot with a bloody rag stuffed in his mouth. Both his eyes were swollen shut. Wendy discovered that she and Tennant were now sitting on the ground, their hands tied outstretched to the log they had been sitting on. Tennant was also awake and starting to look around. Sounds of pilfering came from the tents nearby, and looking past the stranger she could see a pair of very ugly creatures going through the group's supplies. There was the noise of something big approaching, and a huge Groll trod into the firelight carrying Riff over his shoulder. Riff was badly beaten and collapsed with a groan when the creature dropped him at the stranger's feet. The Groll went over to a water skin hanging from a tree and took a drink. "Ah," the stranger said casually, "the missing clod has been brought to justice." "Justice!" interjected Tennant forcefully. "What would a thief like you know of justice?" "Be silent, fool," said the man. "You are the one who stole the green book from those guarding it. It was bad enough that those foolish explorers viewed it before we relieved them of their folly." "But this knowledge is incredible," said Tennant. "It must be brought to all the people of Menedoc." "It will never be seen by those who are better off as they are," said the man. "I told them before that this book should not have been allowed to leave the bogs." And with that he tossed the book into the fire. Windy and Tennant gasped, and at first the book refused to burn. The man sprinkled something from a small bag onto the fire, and the book finally burst into flames. "There," he said, smiling. "Now there's nothing for us to be upset about, is there?" He returned the bag to his pouch. Windy could see tears of frustration welling in Tennant's eyes. He strained at his bonds, and then he settled back and was still. "You fiend," he said quietly. "You will burn for this." "You should worry more about your own fate," the man replied just as quietly. "I have the authority to do whatever I want to you fools." He abruptly smiled as if he had just complimented Tennard on his taste in clothing. Suddenly there was a new noise in the camp, a yowl and the sound of running feet, and the two pilfering creatures were no longer to be seen. "You," he commanded the Groll, "see what they are up to now." The big Groll began to walk off just as a small familiar voice declared plaintively, "Midgie not done yet." The horses hitched to the wagon, which must have belonged to the stranger, lurched forward and dragged the wagon, now spilling supplies onto the forest floor, off into the night. "Never mind the goblins," the man shouted. "Catch that now!" The Groll quickly ran off after the wagon and was gone. More noises indicated that the camp was in turmoil. The man stood and said, "Now, just what in the name of—" "The fires of hell," Sard finished for him as he struck the man in the jaw with a battle-hardened fist. The stranger stumbled over Riff and fell into the fire. The man struggled to a sitting position and was about to shout something when he froze. Sard and Windy looked over at Tennard, who had been freed also. Now standing, Tennard had just completed a spell aimed with a reddened finger at the now burning stranger. "I told you that you would burn," he said with barely constrained rage. "Did I mention that I sometimes have the gift of prophecy?" The fire had been burning for some time and had a deep bed of coals. It flared up as the man's clothing caught on fire. His pouch set off a jet of white-hot flame. "Where's the hooded man?" queried someone on scene. "He is still dangerous." "Oh, he will be out for a while yet," said Filio from behind Windy. "We caught him at study, and he doesn't hold his lotus as well as some do." "Lotus?" said Sard, eyes wide. "That stuff is illegal." "It's all right," responded Cilio from behind Bud. "There's none left to worry anyone." "What about Midgie?" inquired Windy. "I heard her just now." "She is busy with the stranger's trunk," said Filio, as he cut the last rope that bound her. "It is just full of toys. Hefted had to pull her off the wagon's harnesses fittings when the horses got spooked." "And what about our weapons?" asked Sard. "Well, somehow they fell off the wagon before it took off. They should all be right here on the ground," said Cilio with a visible smirk. "Where are the rest of his men?" asked Bud as he helped Riff to a sitting position and away from the burning man. "Dram is keeping things interesting," said Filio. "We taught him a few tricks." "They are chasing demons and sprites and imps through the forest," said Cilio nonchalantly. "They should be back in the morning." "Then let us be gone before then," said Sard, and he began assisting the gnomes with freeing the men. "How did they miss you two?" asked Windy as she helped with the untying of the men. "Oh," replied Cilio, "they did not account for Midgie. She played with the shackles he put on us, and poof, we were loose and untying Tanner and these guys while Tennard and that fellow were talking." "And Groton just loves goblins," added Filio with an evil grin. Smoke remained unconscious despite Hefted's blessing. Sard commandeered all the remaining horses and ordered Smoke, Riff, and Cilio and Filio strapped to them so they could move with better haste. The two extra horses were used as pack animals. The other men gathered the scattered supplies and loaded them into saddlebags. Tanner stared at the burning corpse of the stranger with obvious distaste. I suppose he deserved that, he said, but to be burned alive. He forced himself to turn away and went back to gathering up their gear and possessions. The sound of the stranger's leather armor cracking and hissing could be plainly heard. The stench of burning flesh was starting to be unbearable, and foul-colored smoke swirled around the corpse. Hefted placed Midgie into a large saddlebag along with a few of the toys she had been playing with. He threw a blanket over the mine mage, who lay staring blankly up at the sky. "The one God rewards charity," he said. "Charity for him?" asked Puck. "Oh, not for his sake," said Hefted. "For my sake. He's just a handy victim." A mine mage? The victim of Lotus must turn as he helped Filio onto a horse. I don't know whether to be amused or disgusted. "I recommend amused," quipped Filio. "It's healthier and more satisfying." The moon had come out and lit up a scene of scattered belongings and fallen tents. A groan led Hefted to one of the stranger's soldiers. He had apparently chased an illusion into a tree and knocked himself unconscious. Hefted found another blanket and covered this one as well, letting him sleep off his folly. Smiling with self-satisfaction, he went off to help the men retrieve their supplies. Cilio found some horse droppings and slipped them into the clothes of the mine mage and the unconscious soldier. He, too, went away very self-satisfied. Croton returned from someplace, grinning a peculiarly dwarvish grin. "Goblins," he said. "They just don't ever learn." Wendy looked at Tennard, who remained somber and would not speak. "I'm so sorry," she said. "The book would have changed history, and maybe the times to come." Tennard nodded and fell into line behind the men. Wendy joined the line, and they moved out onto the moonlit road, and at a brisk trot put some miles between themselves and the camp. Graham caught up about a mile down the road, looking smug. "I left them happy, although they will be disappointed come morning," he said. Just before the sun came up, they found an abandoned barn deep in the bush near an old orchard. Sard had Hefted care for Smoke. He showed uncommon concern for the beaten gnome. Perhaps Dorval City had changed them all. Riff, Frog, and two other men who had been beaten were being cared for by Tonner and Dram. They quietly set up camp there, and while two men stood guard, the rest of them got some proper sleep. Rising again at midday, they once again set out for the swamp. Smoke was now sometimes conscious, but still bruised and weak. Riff was in better shape and insisted on walking. None of the horses would allow Groton on their backs, as he smelled of goblin. He trotted along as best he could. Wendy found herself ordered to ride one of the horses to keep their pace up. Midgie rode in front of her, playing with a small torture device and burbling happy to herself. In the next camp, well down the road, far into a thick wood, they finally got Smoke fully awake from his injuries, and he was able to take some food. Hefted was applying an ointment around Smoke's eyes as Sard asked him why the stranger picked him for such a nasty beating. "Revenge," said Smoke. "That was Baron Gettelfor. He told me that he had followed us, meaning to take those papers back and punish me. When he found out that we had the Green Book, he received his superior's authorization to do whatever it took to retrieve the book. He spotted us leaving Harford and hired those bandits to attack us. When he caught me and found out that I had given the papers to the magistrate in Sertia, he became angry." Smoke shifted uncomfortably on his bruised back. "Does he normally beat somebody to the edge of dying and threaten to roast them because he's angry?" inquired Sard quietly. "I may have said some things to worsen his wrath," admitted Smoke. "I do not know him well enough to say if he might not have beaten me if I'd have stayed quiet. But now I think he will follow us relentlessly, as his anger will drive him onward." "He's not going to be chasing anyone now," said Sard. I am concerned about the mind mage that was with him, though. He may yet be following us." "Baron Gellifor not follow? He will not forgive me so easily, I fear," said Smoke. "Only if he joins the undead," replied Sard. "Tennard had a score to settle with the Baron, and the Baron lost." "Oh, that is good news to me," said Smoke with relief. "I think that the mind mage must report back to the circle before he can follow after us. They are accustomed to following orders, not acting alone." "What is this circle you tell of? I thought that they reported to King Henry," asked Sard. "The Baron's title is of no importance to him," said Smoke. "I overheard a conversation that proves his relationship to the School of the Blood and the Red Circle." "School of the Blood?" injected Sard. "A secret cabal of old Elan families that believe in the superiority of Elan heritage and are scheming to place their men on all the thrones of Menodoc," said Smoke. "The circle is the part that makes people tell them things or makes them disappear. The Baron was known for torturing people into telling him what he wanted to know. The mind mage with him was likely just an extra precaution." "That sounds dire. Do the nobility know of this School of the Blood and the Red Circle?" inquired Sard. "I fear that most will not believe in the tales of the school and its circle," said Smoke. "I cannot prove their existence, although I have encountered them a few times. They are very clever." "They might be more myth than men to hide so well." "Was the Baron a myth?" "Well, he was a Baron, after all." "But what other authority could he have had in Thanet?" said Smoke. "He has no position here. His baronial rights only entitle him to noble hospitality and the ear of the king, not to command or punish foreigners." Sard could not answer that, and bid Smoke rest. Their next encampment was disturbed when a group of gnomes discovered them and found out that the heroes of Gorvel City were there. Suddenly there were about 20 noisy, cheerful gnomes, bidding Windy, Sard, and the others to drink and celebrate with them. More gnomes seemed to emerge from behind every bush and tree. As soon as he could distract them and duck out, Sard led the group west and away from the party. "I believe that I would rather battle more undead than attempt to make sense of these gnomes," he said when they were far enough away. Somehow Cilio and Filio brought 2 fresh skins of wine away from the party. They continued to hurry west.